one dog stood ignored by everyone, a creature the town had already condemned. Maybe it was the way he bared his teeth. Maybe the way he barked like he wanted to destroy the whole world. To strangers, he looked like nothing but trouble. But when the lonely veteran Jack Walters appeared, he didn't step back like the others. He stared at the dog for a long, quiet moment and realized this wasn't violence. It was pain. Something terrible must have taught this German shepherd to fear every living soul. And so Jack made a decision, one that felt almost like an apology for Rover, the loyal canine who had died in his arms on a battlefield far from home. He chose the dog no one wanted, the dog everyone feared. But would this broken animal follow Jack home peacefully? Or would he unleash the very aggression the town warned him about? Watch until the end to discover the truth. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you never miss any of our stories. The morning fog drifted low across the Pine Shadow Range, soft and pale like the breath of an old mountain too tired to roar. Jack Walters trudged along the gravel path leading away from his cabin, the wooden structure standing crooked against the tree line like a veteran who could no longer stand tall. Jack was a man in his late 40s with a square jaw dusted with uneven stubble, the kind that looked more like neglect than style. His hair, once a soldier's sharp cut, now grew into unruly strands of dark brown streaked with early gray. Deep crow's feet carved permanent shadows around his eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen sandstorms, blood, and the final flicker of comrades who never made it home. His broad shoulders were slightly hunched, not from age but from a weight he never learned to put down. Although he walked with the strength of a trained soldier, every step carried a quiet hesitation, as if he half expected the ground to explode beneath him the way it had in Afghanistan. Rover's death had been the shrapnel lodged inside his conscience. Rover, the sable-coated canine with the sharp ears and unmatched loyalty, had died obeying Jack's command, a command shouted too quickly under fire. Jack replayed that moment every night in the darkness of his cabin, as if by reliving it, he could somehow rewrite it. But dawn always arrived, and Rover was still gone. Today he forced himself down the trail toward the town of Riverbend. Supplies were low. Even a man determined to hide from the world could not hide from hunger. The town lay tucked between the mountain's shadow and a narrow river, its main street lined with aging brick buildings whose windows reflected the sky like tired eyes. Jack avoided people whenever he could, but that morning he found the square unusually crowded. A banner flapped in the wind. Animal rescue charity action. Help give them a second chance. Jack would have kept walking if not for the sudden eruption of shouts, sharp, startled, uneasy. He turned his head and saw a temporary pen set in the center of the crowd. Inside were several dogs of various breeds, all wagging their tails or whining softly as families and couples bent down to examine them. Then Jack heard the growl, deep, guttural, a warning soaked in pain. In the far corner of a separate metal cage stood a German shepherd, larger than the others, perhaps 4 years old, its chest broad, its coat a harsh mixture of charcoal black and amber tan. Its fur was patchy around the neck, as if rubbed raw by a collar far too tight. The dog bared its teeth at anyone who dared approach, its muscles trembling, not with aggression, Jack realized, but with terror. Every movement it made was tight, reactive, like an animal accustomed to being struck. The handlers around it kept their distance. One of them, a thin man with freckles and a nervous habit of wringing his hands, muttered to bystanders, "This one's trouble. Dangerous. No one's gonna take it." Mother pulled her young son closer. An older man shook his head, Someone laughed dismissively. Jack felt something tighten inside his chest. It wasn't the growling that struck him. It was the dog's eyes. They were wild, searching, darting from threat to threat the same way Rover's had after a mortar ambush years ago. And beneath the fear, Jack saw something else, a plea. An exhausted plea from a creature who had been pushed too far. An involuntary shiver ran through him. His body remembered what it felt like to kneel beside Rover's bleeding form, remembered Rover licking his hand, even as his breathing faded, as if saying, "It's not your fault." But Jack had never forgiven himself. The auctioneer, a tall man with a polished smile and a red vest, raised his voice. "Who will bid on this shepherd? A fine animal, just needs discipline and a strong handler." The crowd stepped back instead of forward. The dog snarled, hitting the side of the cage with its shoulder. People recoiled. Jack didn't move. He approached slowly, his boots scraping the dirt, stopping a respectful distance away. He knelt, not to reach through the bars. Shadow would have bitten from instinct, but simply to be lower, less threatening. The shepherd froze. Its growling thinned to a trembling breath. Jack spoke softly, not expecting words to matter, only tone. "It's all right, boy. You're scared. I get it." The dog's ears twitched. Its eyes, dark, haunted, shimmering like wet stone, locked onto Jack's with an intensity that made the crowd hold its breath. For one fragile moment, the world around them went quiet. No auctioneer, no chatter, no judgment. Just two broken warriors recognizing their own wounds in each other. Jack stood up slowly. Then, to the shock of the handler beside him, he raised a hand. "I'll take him." The auctioneer blinked. "Sir, are you sure? This one isn't—" "I said, I'll take him." His voice held the firmness of a man used to giving commands, but beneath the firmness was something gentler, almost pleading. The crowd murmured, "He's crazy. That dog will tear him apart. Why would anyone pick that one?" Jack ignored them. He paid, signed the papers, and returned to kneel by the cage. The shepherd watched him, trembling, uncertain. "Shadow," Jack whispered to the dog, as if naming it could anchor it to something safer. "Your name is Shadow." And for the first time since he'd seen it, the German shepherd did not growl. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the pine shadow pines, painting long, skeletal shadows across the path as Jack guided Shadow toward the weathered cabin. The dog's paws moved in short, hesitant steps, each footfall placed as if expecting the ground to bite back. When Jack pushed open the cabin door, the wooden hinges groaned, and Shadow instantly jerked backward, hackles rising, teeth flashing for a heartbeat before melting into a shiver. Jack did not reprimand him. He merely stepped aside, his tall frame creating a doorway wide enough for the German shepherd to enter on his own terms. The cabin itself was simple, one main room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed pushed against the wall, and shelves lined with old military manuals Jack never reread. The air smelled faintly of pine smoke and leather, a comforting scent to Jack, but clearly unnerving to the trembling dog. Shadow scanned every corner, eyes darting like trapped birds. His fur, a blend of soot black and burnished tan, rippled over taut muscles as he pressed himself against the far wall. Jack lowered himself onto the floor, joints popping softly, and sat cross-legged near Shadow without touching him. Silence pooled between them, not empty, but fragile. Jack reached slowly into his backpack and pulled out a paperback novel, its cover bent from years of handling. He opened it and began reading aloud, his deep, gravelly voice softened to a warm rumble. He didn't choose the book for Shadow. He chose it for himself, something familiar enough to ground the quiet room. Shadow's ears twitched at the steady cadence, though his body remained tightly coiled. When Jack gently placed a metal bowl of water and another of kibble a few feet away, the dog didn't move. Hours passed. Only when the sky darkened to indigo did Shadow inch forward, first sniffing the floor, then the bowl, licking cautiously while his gaze stayed locked on Jack. Jack allowed himself a slow exhale. It was not victory, but it was a beginning. The next morning brought the arrival of the veterinarian. Dr. Amelia Cross stepped from her dusty blue Jeep, slinging a leather bag over one shoulder. She was a woman in her mid-30s, tall and lean with long auburn hair tied in a messy ponytail that seemed to rebel against her attempts to tame it. Her green eyes were sharp and assessing, the sort that missed nothing, a trait forged from years of working in rural clinics, where she was often the only person standing between a wounded animal and its final breath. Her nature was a mixture of practical compassion and no-nonsense steadiness, shaped partly by her upbringing as the daughter of a rancher who believed kindness meant doing what was necessary, not what was pleasant. "Jack Walters," she greeted, offering a brief nod. "Haven't seen you in town in a while." Jack, standing stiffly beside the porch railing, gave a half shrug. "Didn't have reason to." "Well," she said, stepping past him, "looks like you do now." Shadow hid behind the wood stove, but Amelia crouched several feet away instead of approaching directly. She didn't smile, didn't coax. She simply observed. "He's been hurt," she murmured quietly. Her voice was warm enough to reassure, but firm enough to anchor the moment in reality. Jack nodded, arms crossed. "You can tell?" "I can see the pain in his gait and the fear in his breathing." She eased open her bag, removing a stethoscope and a small flashlight. Shadow tensed, lips curling, but she kept her posture low and non-threatening. "I won't touch him," she said, addressing Jack without looking away from Shadow. "Not yet, but I can already see signs." She pointed gently with her chin. Neck fur rubbed off, likely from an overtight collar. His ribs press unevenly when he inhales. Could be old fractures. And watch how he flinches at the sound of your boots on the floor. Jack swallowed hard. Shadow was not the only one flinching at ghosts. Amelia rose slowly. "Jack, he's not dangerous. He's traumatized." "I know," Jack replied, his voice low. "That's why he's here." Days folded into one another. Jack maintained the same routine, reading aloud, placing food gently, staying present without intruding. Shadow began creeping closer, drawn not by confidence, but by the steady warmth of companionship he had never known. One night, a storm rolled over the mountain. Thunder cracked like gunfire, and Jack jerked awake, breath quickening, heart hammering with old battlefield memories. He sat upright, sweat chilling his skin. Then he felt something warm press against his leg. Shadow. The dog crawled toward him, trembling, not in aggression, but in shared fear. Jack placed a cautious hand on Shadow's head. The dog closed his eyes, leaning into the touch. Two wounded soldiers, one man, one animal, found brief refuge in each other's presence. When the storm passed, both were still awake, but neither felt alone. And for Jack Walters, that was a kind of healing he had not felt in years. A cold wind swept through Riverbend that morning, carrying with it the kind of whisper that made people look over their shoulders. Rumors had a way of multiplying in small towns, and by the time Jack Walters stepped onto Main Street to buy fuel for the generator, whispers had grown into pointed stares. He noticed it first at the general store. Mrs. Halpert, the elderly shopkeeper with silver curls pinned neatly around her round face, glanced nervously toward the street where Shadow sat tied to a post. She was usually soft-spoken and friendly, but today her eyes darted around like someone expecting trouble. "Morning," Jack said, voice polite but clipped in its usual reserved way. Mrs. Halpert hesitated before responding. "Jack, folks are talking about that dog of yours." Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her cardigan, a gesture she made only when frightened. Jack stiffened. "Talking about what?" She swallowed. "They say he snapped at someone yesterday, a kid, near the creek." Jack's brows pulled into a deep, weathered crease. "That's impossible. Shadow never left the cabin. I was with him." But Mrs. Halpert's expression told him the truth didn't matter. The rumor had already taken root. Outside, Shadow stood alert but calm, his large frame tense yet controlled. His fur caught the light, dark charcoal streaked with copper, and his intelligent eyes followed every shifting motion of the street. To Jack, those eyes reflected vigilance, not danger. To others, fear distorted it into something else entirely. As Jack untied the leash, a man approached from across the road. Hal Briggs, a burly mechanic in his late 50s with a square gut and arms thick from years of lifting engines, marched forward with flushed cheeks and a jaw that jutted out like a threat. His beard was coarse and gray, trimmed unevenly as if he'd done it himself in anger. Hal was known for two things: fierce protectiveness over neighborhood children and an unpredictable temper ever since losing his son in a car accident years before. "Jack!" Hal barked. "You need to get that animal out of town." Jack stepped between Hal and Shadow. "Hal, he's not a threat." "Not a threat? My niece said she saw him prowling near the playground yesterday." Snarling. Jack shook his head. He wasn't there. But Hal was past listening. If that dog hurts someone, it's on your head. Others gathered behind him. Parents, shopkeepers, retirees. Some looked uncertain, others outright hostile. Among them was Marlene Porter, a young mother with chestnut hair tied into a braid, carrying her toddler on her hip. Marlene had always been kind to Jack, but now she stared at Shadow with wide, frightened eyes. "Jack, please," she pleaded. "What if he gets loose? The children walk this road every morning." Jack felt the old battlefield tension rise in his chest, tightening like the moment before a blast. Shadow's been mistreated his whole life. He's scared, not violent. But fear seldom yielded to reason. The crowd muttered among themselves as Jack guided Shadow away. As he turned the corner, he heard a voice whisper sharply, "He shouldn't be allowed to keep that monster." The words stung more than he expected. Over the next days, the tension worsened. People crossed the street to avoid Shadow. A petition circulated demanding that dangerous dogs be removed from residential areas. Jack found the notice taped to his cabin door one evening, fluttering like a warning flag. Shadow sensed the unease in the air. He stuck close to Jack's leg, ears pulled back, tail tucked low. The smallest noise, a slammed car door, a falling branch, made him recoil as if expecting blows. Then came the breaking point. A Saturday afternoon, children were playing in Riverbend Park when a little girl riding a pink bicycle hit a patch of gravel and fell. Her knee scraped against the ground, and she cried out. Within seconds, a group of adults rushed over, but someone shouted, "It was the shepherd! I saw it!" Panic consumed reason. Though Shadow was nowhere near the park, the rumor spread like wildfire. That evening, as dusk bled across the tree line, Jack heard footsteps crunching outside his cabin. Before he could react, a rock smashed against the wall, then another. Shadow bolted from the corner of the cabin where he had been resting, tail between his legs, ears flat. Voices shouted from the shadows, Get rid of that dog. He's dangerous. Before someone gets killed. Jack burst through the door, fury in his voice. Stop. Leave him alone. But the attackers scattered into the dark trees. Shadow, shaken to his core, staggered backward, then turned and fled into the depths of the forest. Shadow! Jack's throat tightened as he shouted after him, but the dog was already swallowed by darkness. Minutes later, headlights swept Jack's cabin as the sheriff's truck pulled up. Sheriff Roy Maddox, a tall man in his early 60s with thinning gray hair and a lined face hardened by decades of dealing with town disputes, stepped out. His voice was firm but sympathetic as he approached Jack. Jack, I'm sorry, but we've had too many complaints. If your dog isn't found within 24 hours, we'll have to bring in animal control. Jack felt the words like a sniper's shot. It was Rover all over again, losing a partner, helpless to stop it. The forest loomed quiet and merciless, and Jack felt a hollow ache rise inside him. He couldn't lose another dog. He wouldn't survive it. Without hesitation, he grabbed a flashlight, slung on his jacket, and stepped into the darkness. Shadow was out there, alone, terrified, hunted. And Jack would not let history repeat itself. The forest was a maze of black trees and shifting shadows as Jack Walters pushed deeper into the wilderness, guided only by a fading flashlight and the stubborn beat of his own fear. The night air was icy enough to burn his lungs, and every crack of twigs under his boots sent his nerves flaring, echoing memories from Afghanistan, nights spent tracking insurgents through unfamiliar terrain, nights filled with danger and the knowledge that every wrong step might be his last. Now, the stakes felt just as high. Shadow was out here somewhere, terrified and alone, hunted not by soldiers, but by a town blinded by fear. Jack stopped to kneel beside a patch of overturned leaves and broken branches. He touched the ground with steady fingers. The soil was disturbed recently. Shadow had passed through here, running hard. Hang on, boy, Jack muttered. I'm coming. After nearly an hour of weaving through dense thickets and climbing over fallen logs slick with moss, a faint metallic scent drifted through the air. It wasn't blood. Jack knew that smell. This was something colder, older, rust and oil. Ahead, half hidden behind a curtain of vine, stood an abandoned barn. Its roof sagged to one side, and the wooden boards were warped gray, as though the structure had forgotten strength long ago. Jack approached slowly, his breath shallow. A faint whimper sounded from inside, soft, trembling. Shadow. Jack pushed the creaking barn door just enough to slip through. Moonlight filtered through a gap in the roof, casting a pale beam across the dusty floor. There, in the shadows of the far corner, curled tight against a stack of rotting hay bales, was Shadow, his ears pinned back, chest rising in fast, panicked breaths, his large body shaking uncontrollably. But as Jack stepped forward, Shadow's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. His posture shifted, not toward Jack, but toward the darkness behind the wooden crates that lined the back of the barn. Jack paused, instinct tightening every muscle. Shadow slunk forward, body low to the ground, his nose twitching with precision, a movement Jack recognized instantly from the battlefield. Suddenly, Shadow trotted back to Jack, teeth gently tugging at the cuff of his jacket. Then he pulled. Hard. "What is it?" Jack whispered, letting the dog guide him behind a stack of old crates. As he crouched, Shadow took a protective stance beside him, growling low. Not the desperate, frightened growl Jack had seen before, but a controlled, professional warning. The kind a trained canine gave when danger was close. Jack's pulse thudded. He strained to listen. Then he heard it, muffled crying. A human voice, small, frightened, coming from deeper within the barn. There was someone here, someone being held against their will. Jack edged closer to a large storage crate near the rear wall. Between its slats, he could make out motion. A small figure hunched and bound. A girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old, tear-streaked and trembling. Standing guard nearby was a man Jack had never seen before. He was tall and wiry, maybe in his late 40s, with a thin beard that grew unevenly along a scarred jawline. His clothes were dark and torn, and his eyes, cold, jittery, and glassy, spoke of desperation rather than brutality. This was a man on the edge, someone whose life had unraveled long before tonight. Jack's mind worked rapidly, recalling past missions, assessing angles, exits, timing. But the real advantage stood beside him, Shadow, now completely silent, muscles coiled, waiting. Jack placed a steady hand near Shadow's flank and whispered the command he hadn't used since Rover died, a command he never thought he'd speak again. Shadow. Save. The dog moved like lightning. Shadow leapt from cover, his body a streak of black and tan slicing through the air. He barreled into the man, knocking him backward with the force of a trained interceptor. The kidnapper's head smacked against the wooden floor, his knife skidding out of reach. Jack rushed forward, grabbing the man's arms and pinning him while Shadow stood over him, teeth bared, not biting, only holding the threat still. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured. "Good. That's good." The girl whimpered behind them. Jack secured the man with an old rope, then hurried to untie the child. She had tangled blonde hair and dirt-smudged cheeks, but no visible injuries. Her voice shook as she whispered, "He grabbed me when I was biking home. I didn't know what to do." Jack nodded gently. "You're safe now. Shadow found you." He called Sheriff Roy Maddox on his radio. Within minutes, flashing lights cut through the forest as deputies arrived to take the kidnapper into custody. Sheriff Roy approached Jack with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. "Your dog did this?" he asked. Jack placed a hand on Shadow's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breath. "He saved her. He knew before I did." The deputies exchanged glances, murmuring, not praise, not yet, but something softer than suspicion. Something shifting. As the girl was escorted to safety, she bent down, hesitated for a moment, then gently touched Shadow's head. "Thank you," she whispered. Shadow didn't recoil this time. He simply lowered his ears and leaned into the touch. It wasn't full acceptance from the town, not yet. But for the first time, suspicion loosened its grip, and a sliver of trust took its place. The late afternoon sky over Riverbend glowed with the gentle gold of early autumn, the kind of light that softened edges and made even old wooden storefronts look warm again. Jack Walters walked beside Shadow along Main Street, their steps unhurried. Jack wore his usual flannel shirt and weathered boots, his rugged features calmer than they had been in months. Shadow walked close to his left side, his black and tan coat swaying with each step, tail held low but relaxed, ears alert, yet no longer pinned in fear. It had been several days since the night in the abandoned barn. The town no longer looked at Shadow with open hostility, but there was still a layer of caution, like a curtain half drawn. Children watched from behind their parents' legs. Adults nodded politely at Jack, though their smiles were stiff, unsure. Progress, Jack told himself, even if slow. As they approached Donna's morning griddle, the only diner in town, the comforting aroma of baked bread floated from the open windows. The owner, Donna Hartley, a plump woman in her 50s with curly red hair and a laugh as loud as a church bell, was known for her friendliness to every soul, human or dog. Today, however, she was nowhere in sight. Instead, a teenage waiter swept the porch with sluggish motions, headphones hanging around his neck. Jack took a step toward the doorway, but Shadow froze. Not just paused. Froze. His body stiffened, muscles bunching under his coat, tail rigid. The fur along his spine rose in a sharp line. Jack felt the familiar, prickling instinct from years in combat. Shadow wasn't reacting to people. He was reacting to danger. "Shadow," Jack whispered. The dog didn't look at him. His nose worked furiously, his breaths fast and sharp. Then Shadow lunged forward, grabbing the cuff of Jack's jeans and yanking him back with surprising force. Jack nearly fell. "What's wrong, boy?" Shadow let out a rapid burst of barking, deep, urgent, nothing like fear. A warning. People nearby turned, startled. The teenage waiter blinked in confusion. Is he okay?" Jack didn't answer. He knew better. Shadow darted toward the diner door and began pounding his paws against it, barking louder, frantic. At that moment, Dr. Amelia Cross came jogging from up the street, her auburn hair bouncing behind her, medical satchel thumping against her hip. "Jack, what's happening?" "Shadow's trying to warn us." Amelia approached the door, sniffed. Then her expression shifted instantly. Her green eyes widened. "Jack, gas! I smell gas." Jack inhaled, but the faint chemical tang was barely detectable to human senses. Shadow, however, paced in escalating urgency. Amelia rushed around to the side window, shielding her eyes as she peered into the kitchen. "Jack, the back burner's leaking. The pilot light is out." Her voice tightened. "If someone turns on anything electrical, it'll blow," Jack finished. Shadow barked again, slamming, his body against the door. Jack grabbed the handle and threw it open. "Everyone out. Gas leak." His voice carried the authority of a man who had shouted warnings under fire. Chairs scraped, cups clattered, people shouted in confusion. Donna Hartley burst from the kitchen, her cheeks flushed, still wearing an apron dusted with flour. "What? What's going—" "Out, Donna." Amelia grabbed her arm and pulled her outside. Jack ushered the customers through the front door, while the teenage waiter stumbled backward in shock. Shadow ran in circles, herding people, barking until the last person had cleared the building. Jack shut the door and stepped away. Moments later, the fire department, 2 trucks staffed mostly by volunteers, arrived. Fire Chief Tom Hargreaves, a stout man with a sandy beard and a fatherly face, rushed to Jack. "You the one who found the leak?" Jack shook his head and placed a hand on Shadow's back. "He did." Chief Hargreaves crouched to look at Shadow. "Well, I'll be damned. You just saved half this block, boy." The crowd that had gathered around them shifted. Children peeked from behind their mothers. Adults stared not with suspicion, but with awe. Then, one by one, something remarkable happened. A little girl, Marlene Porter's daughter, stepped forward, a small brunette with wide hazel eyes. She held out her hand. "Can I pet him?" Jack looked at Shadow. Shadow looked at the girl. After a moment, he stepped forward and gently pressed his head into her palm. The crowd let out a soft murmur, almost like an exhale of fear finally released. Donna Hartley waddled over, wiping her eyes. "That dog saved my diner, saved all of us." She bent down and placed a paper plate full of warm meat buns in front of Shadow. "This is for you, sweetheart." Shadow sniffed, then wagged his tail, carefully, shyly, as if he was relearning how to accept kindness. Jack watched, chest tightening with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Pride, relief, healing. That night, as the stars settled over Pine Shadow Ridge, Jack sat on the cabin porch while Shadow slept beside him, stretched out peacefully, with his head resting on Jack's boot. For the first time since Rover's death, Jack felt something loosen inside him, an anchor lifting. Rover had died protecting him. Shadow was living to remind him that he still deserved life, forgiveness, and a second chance. And as the quiet mountain wind brushed past, Jack placed a gentle hand on Shadow's side and whispered, "You brought me back, boy." The dog didn't wake, but his tail thumped twice against the wooden floor. In the quiet echo of Jack and Shadow's journey, we are reminded that healing often arrives in forms we never expect. Some call it coincidence, others call it fate. But perhaps it is something greater, a quiet miracle placed in our path by a God who still watches over the wounded, the lost, and the overlooked. In daily life, we often carry scars no one else can see. Yet sometimes, through an act of kindness, a second chance, or a loyal companion, God sends us a reminder that redemption is real and that broken hearts can be restored. If this story touched you, feel free to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and help these stories reach more people who are searching for light in their own darkness. May God bless you, protect your home, and guide your steps wherever your path leads next.